So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to put this thing on the lift and we're going to pluck this dead Turbo 350 out of it. So what we're looking at here is a gorgeous 1961 Chevy Impala, the famous bubble top. Don't get much more stylish than this in the 1960s. This is a customer's car. I definitely could not call this one mine. This is way above my pay grade. But man, is she a pretty machine. This car was actually built sometime around 2000 and basically sat mostly complete but not totally finished for about 20 years till this gentleman bought it, and I'll tell you the story about that here in a second. Got the full custom interior, the Impala crest on the back. It's really a nice machine. Got full air ride set up, huge console, put lots of goodies in there. It's just a gorgeous machine. I've done a lot of work to this car, basically completed all the wiring, and I'll show you what we did up here in the front. But she's a wonderful cruiser, with the exception of a dead transmission. So are you fellas familiar with the old song about the She's Real Fine, My 409? Well, that's what this jewel has. You want to talk about some beauty and engineering right here. This is, in my opinion, one of the best looking engines ever built by anybody, hands down. She is just gorgeous. She is a piece of jewelry. So my connection with this car began when the owner bought it, before he actually got to drive it. He bought it, been sitting for many, many years. He took it home, primed the carburetors, started the thing up. One of the carburetors was, floats was hanging up, it was empty. The other one was flooding. Long story short, had a backfire, blew fuel out of the top of the engine, and just almost burnt the car down. I'll insert some pictures here to show you what happened, but it was not good. It burnt the whole engine, it cooked the firewall, burnt the inner fender, burned everything off the bottom of the hood, burned everything off the inside of the scoop area of the hood. It was a disaster. So that happened to it before he even got to drive it. So about a year and a half ago, we took it in burnt form, pulled the engine, got the thing cleaned up, which if you've never cleaned up fire damage, holy cow, that is a mess. So we were able to refinish the hood, that inner fender, the firewall, repaint the engine, and got the thing running. And man, this thing is a treat to drive. So without any more wasted time talking about it, we'll go ahead and put this thing up in the air and get to pulling the transmission. Here we are underneath the belly of the Impala, and here we see GM's X-frame. Basically, as you can see, there's a big X instead of the traditional frame rails on the outside, which GM used before and after. And you can also see here why this swap here is a complex situation. Not ideal anyways. See, that drive shaft is about a 2-inch diameter shaft, and it goes through a good nearly 3-foot section of the inside of that X-frame, which makes it quite challenging get drive shaft in and out, and more importantly, upgrade to a larger diameter drive shaft, which you want in a high horsepower application. There's just simply not enough room. Then you've got a small bolt-in cross member. See this little adapter here? It's a short speedometer cable. This electric gizmo that drives the Dakota digital gauge cluster. Stock one would have had a cable all the way to the speedometer. Here we have the typical leaky turbo 350, made even worse by a cheap steel chrome pan. You're not going to get those to leak, not leak rather. There's just not much room in this car to get to stuff. You can't see very well, but there's about maybe an inch between the top of the transmission and the transmission itself. And up there, you can just barely see this guy here bolted to the tail shaft of the transmission. Right there is the shifter that goes up through the floor. So that linkage rod there goes up there to the shift bell crank. There's going to be some fabricating and stuff I'm going to have to do there. Hopefully I won't have to chop any of the floor pan, because I really don't want to take the whole entire console out and peel the carpet or whatever. 700 R4 is real close dimensionally to the Turbo 350, so we'll see what we get into there. That's going to be an unknown for now, but we'll find out soon enough. First thing I'm going to have to do is get in there and get this drive shaft pulled out, which that's going to be fun. I haven't pulled one of these out of these full-size GMs in a long time. There's some sort of a carrier bearing assembly right there, so we'll see how that goes. That is an unknown. I could end up fighting this thing all day. We'll find out. Stick around. Okay, so I've already pulled out the 2 bolts holding the carrier bearing assembly. I'm going to zip out the bolts here on the drive shaft loops. Oops, loops. And then hopefully I can worm this drive shaft up out of the way without having to drop the sway bar. Like I said, I haven't pulled one of these out in a long time. Those nuts right in the floor for a moment. Excuse me. The only good thing about that chrome transmission pan is that it has a drain plug in it. So I've already drained the transmission fluid, so other than what'll spill out the tail shaft, I probably am good on my leaks. One bad thing about having a shop that insulated as well as mine is once fumes get in the air, they just hang around for a couple days. As always, I appreciate y'all tuning in, hanging out for the show. Hopefully I can continue to make a good enough comment or content that you want to hang around for a long time. I'm in it for the long haul, as long as you fellers are too. Don't you hate it when a nut or bolt is just barely tight enough you can't turn it easy with your fingers, but just barely loose enough that it doesn't work well with a ratchet? Just sit there and clutches, spins, freewheels, whatever you want to call it. That transmission's been leaking for quite some time, so there's a good coat of preservative, aka transmission fluid, all over everything down here. Nice fine mist. Okay, so let me get a pan up here. Like I said, it's been a while since I've pulled one of these out. So I'm not sure what all is required, which way the drive shaft has to come out. So this could be a interesting. Okay, so the whole thing's coming. I don't know if it has to come out to the front or what. Okay, that was the yoke. Trying to look at my angles. there's no angle that looks like it'll work well to get this thing out of here. Worst case scenario would obviously be having to pull the transmission out, or the sway bar or something. Trying to get the right angle here, I'm not sure. That's just a slip yoke. Let's see, my yoke is hanging up. Yeah, this is a pretty stupid design here, if I'm being honest. Not the fact that it's got a carrier bearing, which looks to be brand new, by the way. Oh, here we go. That's the ticket. For a high performance application, you need a large diameter drive shaft. So this car's not making a whole lot of horsepower, but this drive shaft, you really can't go no bigger. Next up is the removal of the bell housing shield. Battery's disconnected already. Funny story about my my buddy Chase, the one that passed away a couple of years ago. He was a die-hard Mopar guy. Anyways, he was a big dude, about 450 pounds. Anyways, he came over to I forget what it was. I think it was a starter he was working on his Dodge pickup truck. I can't remember if it was his SRT10. I believe it was probably his 2005 or 6, whatever year it was. Ram 1500, 4-wheel drive. Anyways, he had it over here on the lift, and he was messing with something down by the starter. Can't remember for the life of me what it was. And he barely had the truck up a couple feet off the ground, and he was working right down there in the vicinity of the starter, and I happened to walk by, you know, and I happened to also observe that the battery was still connected. So I asked him, "Hey man, you want me to disconnect this battery?" He's like, "No, don't worry about it." And about 3 minutes later, I hear a "Oh God, blah 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 blah." Dropped a few F-bombs, arcing and sparking down there with a ratchet. And I'm like, "Hey man, you want me to disconnect that battery?" He's like, "Yeah, probably ought to." I laughed. He didn't hurt anything other than melting the starter post. Alright fellers, next up on the list is busting these torque converter bolts off. This has a 12-point bolt on one side and a nut on the other. So having a nut on it actually makes it easier. So one thing I hate about modern transmissions, they don't have this whole section open. So this is all one piece. So you gotta, most of them, except for some of the heavier duty truck transmissions, you gotta try to get through these tiny holes in here. It's ridiculous. Tell you what, they don't make most vehicles where they're easy to work on. I think they call it planned obsolescence. Okay, up here on the front of the crank, I have a big breaker bar. I've said before, back in the day, they built stuff where you could easily work on it, you know, especially trucks. But like, they knew, A, that the vehicles, you know, the technology wasn't there for the vehicles to last 100,000 miles with no work required. Well, this nut's rounded off pretty good. And so they made stuff easy to get to. It wasn't a pain in the butt to do anything. So That's not designed into vehicles anymore. Now they design vehicles primarily for ease of assembly at the assembly plant. I mean, that's why you have, for example, like most of the diesel trucks, like Fords or whatever, where they've got exhaust piping and stuff that runs down the back of the engine. The motors, in pretty much everything, sets way back under the firewall. It's pretty ridiculous, but most of that stuff, you break open a assembly manual or whatever, and what to do to, say, fix a turbo pipe leak or something, and it starts with how to take the cab off. It's like, that's ridiculous. Like, what kind of an idiot designs a vehicle where you got to go to those lengths to do just a simple repair? That's one thing I like more about working on old cars, is just simply a lot of things are just easier to work on. I mean, there are exceptions. For example, this car, getting the drive shaft out, but still, as a whole, most old cars are quite simple to work on. Which is a shame, you know, that since I've also talked about before, there's not as many younger guys into working on stuff. Well, if everybody started with wrenching on something like a 1965 Chevy Malibu or something like that, or Mustang, it's like you can get a lot of knowledge working on something that's relatively easy to work on. But I don't know if dads or grandpas or whatever aren't doing a very good job of passing on a worker mentality, or, you know, get grease into your fingernails thing. But a lot of this stuff really is not difficult. It's like, and if you're one of them fellers who's not really done much mechanically in your life, don't be afraid to get in there and do it. It's not difficult, most of it. You get in a jam, find some little hot rodder or somebody like me or whatever, and we can help you, you know, work your way through some problems. Get frustrated, just walk away. Go have a drink, or let it sit till the next morning. When I first started doing mechanic work, I'd get frustrated with something and just go to fighting it, you know. And it didn't take me long to figure out that if you just walk away, sometimes when you come back, you've had a fresh mind and the solution is just right there. Okay, I'm gonna decide what I want to pop off next. Alrighty then, what I'm gonna take off now is this little bell crank, whatever you want to call it, this little arm for the shifter. There's an adjustable rod that goes front to rear to the shifter. This aftermarket floor shifter, I'm putting these on here, so basically when you bust this nut loose, these or a crescent wrench or whatever works, you don't really just want to be twisting and jerking real hard on the internal parts of the transmission. Best just hold this. Anyways, getting back to what I was going to say is there are a couple of options for this floor shifter. I'm not for certain how the inside of that shifter is built, but most of the time there's little detents, like little notches in the shift pattern that keeps you basically from accidentally going from like reverse to drive or drive to reverse on accident or whatever. Always put your nuts and stuff back on here. I'm not sure which shifter that's for. It is for a 3-speed. So I'm gonna have to talk to the owner, see what he wants to do. Lots of times you can just modify the detents, those notches, weld grind them and reshape them to where you can get an extra gear. It's a lot of work. The other option is to just modify the angle of that, where you can get park, reverse, neutral, drive. It'd be third and second, but there sometimes isn't enough travel to get all the way back to first gear, low range. So we can either buy a whole new shifter assembly or just modify what we got to be able to grab all the gears. What you can't do is you can't have detents there in your shifter that don't match up with the detents in your transmission. There's a little spring-loaded roller in here that catches park, reverse, neutral, drive. You could go clink, 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 clink and feel it. And your shifter kind of has the same kind of setup, and you can't mismatch those two. Alternatively, you could take the shifter part of it and just round off all the detents, so all you would have is what's here. But that's just a couple of options. I don't know what we're going to do in this application yet, but just so you're aware. And also, while we're here, a lot of the Ford transmissions, that little arm you can't take off without dropping the pan and pulling a nut off. Similar to this, it's on the inside because that arm won't come out. It's one piece with what goes into the transmission. So working on a Ford, it's different. Okay, that arm is loose. I think I'll come back here and disconnect the speedometer cable. I find the easiest way to get these off is with a small pair of channel locks. All right, one more click. This one was pretty loose. Sometimes the seal in here will fail, so don't be standing right under here. Sometimes you get a drink of antifreeze or transmission fluid. If you get antifreeze out of this, you got a real problem, which is more urgent than a transmission swap, I'll tell you. Okay, let's lift this up here out of the way. Might have to fix some of those wires. Okay, the other part of this shifter goes up, and there's two Allen head bolts up on top of the output shaft, but we'll pull those off after we drop back the transmission down. We'll go ahead and disconnect the vacuum modulator back of the transmission. That out of the way. And now on to the right hand side of the transmission. So we're going to do this next. We're going to bust the nuts off of the transmission cross member and pull these nuts off, or the bolts out of the bottom of the transmission mount. We're going to leave the bolts in there so it don't drop on our head. And I'm going to scoot my transmission jack right here, and we'll see about dropping the back of this transmission, and I'll show you why if you've never done it before. Make sure you leave a nut in there, or the bolt rather. Okay, so that's the next size down. Give me a minute. Got me a new impact, and that sucker grabs these sockets. Don't hardly turn loose. This job will really actually begin in earnest when we go to put the new transmission in. If this was just a pull out and install the same transmission, this would be much easier, but we're putting the transmission in here that's never been in this car. So it's gonna need a lot more finagling and work and figuring. Now I'm getting my transmission jack up into place. If you don't have a lift, you're probably doing this in the driveway, but you should use a good floor jack. You got to screw a board to the top of it, get it good and balanced, throw a strap over the transmission. You don't want to drop a slippery transmission off on your face, or drop a torque converter out the front on your face. Either option's no good. So I'm going to just pick this up just high enough where I can get a little wiggle on my bolts here, pull them out. Get this whole cross member out of the way. You can barely get the bolts in and out of this hole. Run right into the frame. Personally, not a fan of the X frame design for this very reason, that and the drive shaft. Didn't take GM very long to get away from building him this way. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is just drop the back of the engine, transmission, the whole assembly down. What you got to watch is that you don't get your exhaust in a bind or anything like that. If we have to, we'll pull the exhaust off, but I really don't want to. It's really a pain with this 409 with shorty headers. It ain't good, so if I can avoid it, I'm going to try to. Okay, I'm going to put a pan under the back here in case the tail shaft drips. Probably got some fluid trapped in it. Okay. About all we're going to get out of it. Okay, it's just hanging on the motor essentially at this point. Alright, so I will show you why we did that. Okay, so now with the back of this transmission dropped, what that does is it gives you way more clearance above the transmission. Before we had not even half that much space up there. There's probably 2 inches from the top of the trans to the floor pan. More importantly, it allows you to get access to your bell housing bolts. See, I can get to that, both of those right there, real easy. The ones up top, with that flange right there, when the light's shining, you can't get to the ones up top. They're up there. I'll have to crawl up top on the motor with a ratchet wrench and bust those loose. And we can now get a clear shot at those bolts to take the shifter bracket assembly off. It's only 2 bolts. I'll tie wire that thing up. Then over here, this is going to be very difficult to get you in here to watch, but you can see the dipstick tube, which is the braided stainless, the 2 nipples where the rubber hoses are with the tape on them. That's the transmission cooler lines. And then there's a little feller right there with 1 bolt. That is the kickdown cable. So I'm going to pull all of those loose at this point, as well as the other 2 bell housing bolts, which are there and up there a little higher. But before I do those, I'm going to go up top and pull the 2 bell housing bolts up from the top. You never ever pull out all of your bell housing bolts until you're ready for that transmission to come out. So I always leave the one that's easiest, which in most vehicles is that little fella right there. It's the one you can get to real easy. Everything else unbolted on the trans, you can just pull that and then have the transmission come out. Don't ever pull them out until you're ready for this thing to be in your face. All right, under the hood of your unit, you're gonna have to disconnect your downshift cable. Yours is probably not going to look just like this. Yours is probably going to have 2 little squeeze tabs. You're probably going to have the exact same setup as this. We just got to pop that back and take that off. We'll leave this attached to the transmission and just snake it down. This is a low car cable setup, which is pretty common on hot rods. Lots of times you're building your own cable as far as lengths and all that. And this thing being a dual quad, it's got a complicated little setup. But you're more than likely dealing with either a throttle body injection unit or a single carb. So it's real easy. You just can't forget to do this, so you'll break that cable, or worse, pull something loose in the transmission. So what I also have to do with this aftermarket unit is I have to pull this set screw out and to get this nut out of the way. So I'm not going to show you that part of it. Basically, you've already seen what you need to do. Next up is going to be the removal of these transmission lines. What you're probably going to have on your rig is just plain old nuts with hard lines. I'm trying to get you in here where you can see. This car has rubber lines. Not sure why. Probably initial builder was too lazy to bend any lines or anything like that. I don't know, probably the headers is what kept them from doing a off-the-shelf line. Hopefully these will come off here. If they don't, I'll just split it with my box knife. Neither one of these is super tight. Got to get a screwdriver. Sorry, I'm trying to hold the camera with one hand and get in here into real hard to get to area with another. Not ideal. I'm gonna change hands. Trying to give you a complete picture of what's going on here. So you have to cut me some slack on camera work. Okay, those are both loose. I'm gonna try to jerk them off with you watching. Oh, that one went right off. Oh, that's awesome. There's no flare on there. He's lucky he didn't just blow these right off. That's ridiculous. You never ever put a rubber hose with a clamp over a line that is not flared. He's lucky this thing didn't blow up a long time ago. All right, so I've already disconnected my tube from the top. Yours is probably going to be a hard tube that's going to be connected to one of your bell housing bolts. This one is an aftermarket, so it's disconnected up there, as is my shift cable. So that's all ready to come out. Now I'm going to get up, you're not going to be able to see it, but I'm going to get up in there with a wrench and bust that bell housing bolt off and that one. So that's what's going to be next. That and cleaning up a mess. All right, fellers, we're just about down to the last couple of bolts. And that's for the shifter assembly. If you're doing this on something other than an old street rod, you're not going to have this setup like this to work with. Hey, golly, that thing was tight. Holy cow. You probably will have a shift cable assembly that bolts onto one of your bolts on your transmission pan. If you got a floor shift. Otherwise, you'll just have some metal linkage going into the side of the trans from your column. Okay. I got a spacer in here that's probably going to hit me in the mouth on the way out. Nope, just went in the floor. And one more on the other side. Now I've got all the bell housing bolts out except for that one over there. So I'm going to throw a couple of straps on this transmission because you do not want to be trying to catch a slippery, leaky old transmission when it comes off that jack. That's about as much fun as a Taco Bell fart in a sleeping bag. It ain't good. More than likely you're gonna get injured. And if you're like me, you couldn't take no more brain damage. I'm kidding. Just trying to be funny. You gotta take it personal. All right, now how can I wedge this thing up so it don't come out of the car? All right, before we drop this thing out of here, pull the last bolt, let's have a real quick talk about how to properly strap a transmission when you're pulling it out of a vehicle, especially an automatic. Okay, so you've got this, which is the platform of your transmission jack. And we're gonna use this funnel to visualize the shape of a transmission. Transmissions are tapered, just like this. So when you set your transmission on your transmission jack, it's like this, right? So when you throw a strap on it, you're coming around, right? And you're strapped to your jack. You throw a strap on it. You have to make sure that you keep that thing angled like this, much like it is in the vehicle, with the tail shaft down with your strap on it. Because if you have it flat or like this, it can go just like this. You want the weight of your transmission to keep the strap tight, like so. Get it too far forward, your strap ain't gonna do nothing, it's gonna go like this. And then you're gonna have a 200-pound chunk of something right in your face. Not good. Or on the cement and break an ear off or something stupid. So put your strap on there right. All right, y'all ready for this? I'm gonna make sure, like I said, to keep my transmission at a proper angle, tail down, nose up. I've got just a little bit of pressure on it. I'm gonna try to not get in your way. I'm gonna come over here and pop this last bell housing bolt out. while blocking the tires or the wheels on this jack from rolling. This one's already starting to pull away, so it's going to come right out. You also want to make sure that when you pull your transmission back, that you keep it square as possible with the back of your engine block. You don't want to hang it up crooked on an ear. Lots of times they'll stick on your guide pins, which you've got one on both sides up, which is, you can see them, but they're by the second bolt up. Sometimes you have to work them a little. This one we're not, because the engine's been out recently. But if you get one hanging up, squirt penetrating oil on it, push the transmission back, pull it back, you know, back both directions, just work it. Just up and down a little, but you do not want to get all cattywampus and hang up on a guide pin. You can break your corner right off the block, or more likely the transmission. Okay, we've got good separation on that. I'm going to put one hand on the transmission and one on the jack, back it up, and gently come down. You never want to take your hand off the transmission. Just kind of steady it, even if you do got a fancy jack like this. You're going to want to make sure that your downshift cable isn't catching on something. And I'm hoping mine doesn't, because it's very difficult to get up there. Let's see. I gotta push my cable over a little. My aftermarket dipstick tube is kind of gotta find a good way out. Okay, there it comes. Okay, my dipstick tube down, and my kickdown cable. All right. Hands back on it, and down we come. Down, pull it back just a little. Down, pull it back just a little. And do not let the thing tip over nose first. I'm free of everything. And that is that. I'll roll this nasty pig out of the way. Well, we've successfully removed the lady in red here. A little too much red in my opinion, but whatever. So if you're watching this video just to learn how to pull a Turbo 350 out, we're pretty much done. Installation is more or less the exact reversal of disassembly. An extremely important part is that you make sure whatever your measurement is here between the face of this and the face of your torque converter when you reassemble needs to be the same. There's 3 separate clumps you're going to have when you push your torque converter in, and if you miss the last one and you go to tighten that engine up, you can damage the oil pump on the inside of the transmission and not even realize it until it's too late. So make sure before you pull the torque converter out that you straight edge across here and measure to the face of that, because that's what you're going to want when you put it back in. Very important. Don't mess that up. Alrighty then. Now, if you're watching this for the 700R4 swap, or you're just my regular subscribers, stick around and we'll jump into what's required to put a 700R4 4L60, whatever you want to call it, in the place of a Turbo 350. So stick around for episode 2 covering that, and we'll jump into whatever that's going to entail. I appreciate y'all watching, and stick around for the next one.